I don't know what use of force continuum is. I have no idea what they're referring to there. So I don't know. I'll tell you what, Tony. Let me share my screen so that we're not trying to do this from memory. I don't know. I kind of do. You want to kind of walk us through this and kind of what the obvious ones mean that might be counterintuitive from somebody
we got into a debate earlier in the week with Tony because I think 8 Can't Wait they have like model language and they really want bans on these things, and they want things in writing that says, yes, we can sue a police officer for violating these, rules.
Sure.
Rules of engagement or whatever. And I think that part of the discussion we got in is that cops are generally trained to follow these rules, but there's not necessarily the explicit ban that 8 Can't Wait is looking for.
I think there's an opportunity for a good faith effort to be made that if law enforcement is resisting that, I would be curious to know. I'd be curious to know what, all right. So like when you hear that the United States is the last country in the world that hasn't signed this treaty out banning landmines, like I get a similar this is kind of in that it is in that realm of feeling like there's probably information that I don't know that makes make sense once I know that information. Just expecting people to know and be comfortable with knowing that police officers are not being actively trained. In fact, they're being actively trained to not do these things. Is a good enough stand-in for a standing written policy. I don't know. I don't think. I mean, this obviously doesn't quite rise to the level of landmines, but I hope that kind of illustrates.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about any of these that you want. You had mentioned use of force continuum to begin with. If the expectation is that in a use of force situation, I don't think it's reasonable that an officer has to be punched in the face first to then respond with likewise force. Now, we're not trained to punch somebody in the face, but closed hand strikes are appropriate on an appropriate person in the appropriate spot on their body. Open hand strikes are appropriate. Kicks are appropriate. Again, when placed in geographically centered spots on the body. Most everybody's gotten a Charlie horse, right? A common peroneal kick, very effective, very, very effective. If the continuum is 1-to-1, where officers can only respond with the same level of threat or force that is used against them, I think that's unreasonable. I don't think an officer has to wait to be shot at to shoot back to protect themselves or somebody else. I just don't. That's the meat and potatoes. That's bare bargain. And it's my understanding that 8 Can't Wait. That's one of the anchors that they have. That's one of the initiatives that they have is officers will not use any force that they are not being subjected to themselves. And I don't think that's reasonable. If that's the case, if somebody pulls out a knife and threatens to slice my throat, do I have to then counter that with a knife myself? And does an assailant have to try and stab me before I'm allowed to utilize deadly force to protect my own life? And it's not just protect my own life. It's my life or great bodily harm.
Well, I guess how many situations fall into the the gray area that's inevitably going to emerge there, where you have to make a judgment call. Is this going to further escalate to, if I don't do something now, is this going to get worse for me or someone else?
I mean, I wish I could give you a number.
Right. I don't even. Right.
One out of every 5 police interactions is like that, or 1 out of every 100. But it's an unpredictable, dynamic, and fluid world. I mean, I don't know.
Right.
You know, I can tell you every time an officer arrests somebody, they use force. That's the old cliche, and that force is my presence, my uniformed presence of standing in front of you and telling you, Eric, you have a warrant for your arrest. I'm now going to handcuff you and take you to jail. That's verbal. That's verbal force.
Sure.
I'm imposing my will on you.
I do not get to say no.
Right. It's not it's not harmful to you in the fact that your life isn't going to end. I mean, that's not a black eye or a Charlie horse, but that would be a defined use of force on my part. That is my verbal authority, my voice, my physical presence telling you I'm now taking away your freedom to leave. Now that's a far cry from me, taking my baton out and striking you on the forearm because you're trying to punch me in the face.
So what I see is, so I opened up the websites real quick, and from the 8 Can't Wait website, you can get to, I'm sure there's multiple ways to get to it, but Campaign Zero's model policies, breaking down. And so you can get into the research, seeing why they recommend these policies. And it's because when they have them implemented, they have a statistical reduction in deaths to victims and to officers and such like that. So there is the research out there to say that their words are working. And so like the alternatives to use of force, and this is where it probably doesn't work for podcast or radio because I would be reading stuff, but it comes from the Seattle Police Department, which, I mean, we could discredit other police departments if you want, but I think all of their recommended language comes from either a police department or from something that was agreed upon in court, like dictated language that the court dictated, So I feel like they have decent language, and I would have a hard time saying that any individual, and this is, I guess, maybe the way I approach my profession too, is like, I never think that I can come up with something better myself than like the big group that's out there that's put it together. And so somebody has gone through the work of putting together model language, and just plain out rejecting that model language. I think we have to start from that model language and say what's wrong with it before we reject it. Yep. And if your local police department has rejected all of the model language, that doesn't sound like they're acting in good faith, without having a whole lot of discussion or something we can look up at and say, this is what we have, and this is why we're not agreeing to the model language. Like, I feel like I need that. Otherwise,
I wish 8 Can't Wait would push for a national use of force policy that departments need to adopt. I would not be opposed to that. And if an agency resisted that, then they lose federal or state funding. I would be okay with that. I will tell you from my own experience, Justin, there is a sheriff's department very near where you live where a deputy can use a taser at verbal noncompliance. So one of the thresholds would be verbal noncompliance. Active non-compliance would just be active noncompliance would be, dead weight, just somebody not moving. That would be the protesters that are linking their arms together. Yep. That sheriff's department, they've got the taser very close to verbal noncompliance. So to paint the picture of that, a deputy pulls somebody over and says, sir, you need to get out of your car. The guy says no. Bzz, they zap him with the taser. For the agency that I work at, that's not going to fly. The application of the taser is way up on the use of force, where someone has to be actively trying to hurt me or hurt somebody else. It would be akin to active aggression, which is coming at me, fist clenched, cocking their hand back, grabbing onto somebody, throwing someone on the ground. If it's a mutual combatant fight that I get to, there has to be outward and aggressiveness on that person for me to be able to utilize my taser. So again, we are in the same state, and we've got two agencies, both of which our police officers were both, working under state law, and their policy. Now, again, that was 16 years ago. They very well may have revamped that by now, but maybe they didn't.
So I think what I'm hearing you say is that the nuance in policy is super important. Is one piece, is like the second piece of what you said. But the first piece really caught me, in part because it seems like the antithesis of conservative ideology. And essentially what you said is 8 Can't Wait is a ground roots organization fighting for influence, and you wish they had national power behind them dictating rules so that you would know what the rules are to follow on a local level. And that seems like,
Well, I don't know. I would rather that they would push for this. If that's what you heard, I mean, maybe I meant to say that. I don't know. I just, for me, being a street cop, I'll tell you, tell me how to play by the rules so that I can do so safely for myself, safely for the people that I talk to, safely for the people that I'm going to end up arresting. Give me a set standard, and then hold me to that standard, and don't change that standard. And then
I very much agree with you. It just feels like
I think
not everybody knows where to bring the battle. Do you bring it from the grassroots and trying to gain popular influence, which I think is the way that 8 Can't Wait is going for, or do you influence that top down and people resist it because it wasn't locally built and stuff like that, and so it's hard to know the right way to win sometimes. So, but yeah, I know, and I think that when a bigger group gets together, they can work out those details and they can do a better job. And to be honest, and people get resistant about that politically, but to be honest, like as a teacher, like we had one of those big groups come out and like come together with like all of the right shit. And then the main criticism we had was that it wasn't locally determined, and so therefore it was wrong, And
you're telling me Betsy didn't alleviate that for you?
Betsy wasn't really concerned about what actually happens in public schools.
Just a quick jab. There were other things about 8 Can't Wait when I delved into it a little more. One of their sticking points is they don't want any local police agency or state agency to be on any type of a concept team with a federal agency. I think where they were going with that is narcotics teams. So DEA working with task force, and probably immigration teams. I think those are that's what I gathered were their two sticking points. I understand from where they're coming. I get it. They're not a fans of plainclothes detectives. If we just slash those right away, I can tell you in an urban setting, we lose a huge investigative tool with fugitive apprehensions, because the marshal services and their task force, they do an amazing job of arresting really, really bad people and people that have done really, really bad things. There's another one, Eric, I know your wheels are spinning because I know you can't stand plainclothes law enforcement. If we just slash any task force, my knee-jerk reaction to that is, what about internet crimes and crimes against children and child pornography? Because that is probably one of the biggest resources that we have, is federal funding and federal agencies with not just the hardware, so the actual computers to help us do it, but the know-how and the budgets to back it, because those are very long, very exhaustive, very expensive, but also very necessary investigations. And Justin, I'm confident that if there were a very heinous child assault, sexual assault up in your neighborhood, it would get investigated, but man, would it take a really, really long time for that to get investigated if we did not have those concept type teams. So,
I definitely agree that there is a place for resources to be shared,
right?
And conversations to be shared at bigger levels.
Yep. But I guess my point is, if everybody, because 8 Can't Wait is putting this stuff out there and saying, contact your city leaders, call your city councils, email your mayor, tell them this is what you demand. And if that's what the people want, okay, then we will respond accordingly. That's who our constituents are. That's what we have to do as a police department. Just understand that that's warts and all. I mean, there are a lot of services like internet crimes against children and things that will not be investigated or will be severely hampered with their investigations because of not having that federal resource.
So I will say, I feel like 8 Can't Wait is just a project by Campaign Zero. And so their things seem to be exactly what Eric recommended earlier, that have a certain amount of research behind them. And I don't know that they're going into the details, but that's not to say that Campaign Zero isn't saying this is something that we want that I didn't see on the surface. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
And I'm sure Campaign Zero makes some mistakes, in the things that they're advocating for. One of the things that I appreciate about Campaign Zero is actually they have, instead of 8, they actually have 10 premises that Campaign Zero had that they were advocating for. And like 3 of them have yield signs saying, we're not sure about the evidence on these 3. So if you have them, do them right. But, maybe we shouldn't necessarily be advocating for them, but they're still part of the conversation we need to be having. And that's like the cameras thing that we've talked about,
Mm-hmm.
Where there are flaws in having your camera on all the time. You also pointed out, and we're very clear with us, there's flaws in shoot them in the leg. Like, we don't probably need to go there. There's some obvious flaws there. And so I appreciate when somebody can say, I think we need to keep this on the table, but there's some flaws here. So I don't know, I don't know. I feel like that gives credibility. And I don't want to, I feel like maybe what you were doing there is putting extra words into the 8 Can't Wait mouth, that they're asking for this other thing. And I feel like, and maybe it doesn't work on, like, again, on podcast or radio to dig down to. It's fine, what they're saying. And yeah, we need some groups to sit down on a big level and talk about this stuff. And maybe a new administration will bring 8 Can't Wait to the table.